I've been wanting to make a short video on Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, and on this message that Jesus gives about the end times and the second coming. The reason why I wanted to do this is because when you read Matthew 24 and Mark 13, the order of events that are listed there are very confusing because they do not seem to match up with the book of Revelation, and they do not seem to match up with a lot of things that people teach. And I find it very helpful to focus on Luke 21 because Luke 21 has words and phrases in it that are extremely clear and that show you what parts of what is written are for what time period. And so I just quickly want to look at this. If you look at Matthew 24 and Mark 13, you will end up with the following timeline, which is very different. It starts by listing the beginning of the birth pains before the return of Christ, or before the tribulation. And this is very consistent with Luke as well. These are not confusing. It gets confusing after this. But the birth pain signs of the coming of the end are false teachings, wars and rumors of wars, nations against nations, famines, and earthquakes. So these are signs that are showing that we're coming near the end. And then it says these are not the end themselves. They're just sign that we're getting to the end. Then it goes on and says that there's going to be persecution, armies that will surround Jerusalem and the abomination of desolation, the beginning of the great tribulation, great signs in the heavens, and the return of Christ. If you take these things and you just read them straight out in Matthew 24 and Mark 13, basically what you understand is that the rapture is after the tribulation, after the abomination, and it's near the end, right around the second coming of Christ. So it's very confusing because this does not seem to match what is written in Revelation. So the key to understand the different parts of what is written in Matthew and Mark is to look at Luke 21. So let's look at Luke 21 because Luke 21 qualifies the time periods that are talking about in the other passages. Luke 21, 8-18. He replied, "Watch out that you are not deceived, for many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am he,' and the time is near. Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away." Then he said to them, "Nations will rise against nations, and kingdoms against kingdoms. There will be great earthquakes, famines, pestilence in various places, and fearful events, and great signs from heaven. But before all of this, they will seize you and persecute you. They will hand you over to the synagogues and put you in prison. And you will be brought before kings and governors, and all on account of my name. And so you will bear testimony to me. But make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you will defend yourself, for I will give you the words and wisdom that none of you, your adversaries, will be able to resist or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents, brothers and sisters, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but not a hair on your head will perish." So we have the normal signs here of false teachers, nations rising against nations, and great earthquakes and famines and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. But verse 12 says, "But before this." So verse 12 is basically taking what is coming after and putting it before these signs. Before all these signs show up, before the signs of the end times arrive, you will be seized and persecuted, and you will be betrayed by your own family. And this happened to them very soon after Jesus had prophesied this to happen. So verse 12 is key here to understand that before these signs happen, before the signs in heaven and all these nations rising against nations, there's other things that are going to take place, one of which is persecution of the church and hatred of the church by all nations. Now, I want to be clear here that this does not mean that there will not be persecution at the end. There will be persecution. There is persecution of the church all the time, And I believe that all Christians should be ready for persecution. But I don't believe that all churches will be persecuted when the rapture occurs. And this is quite clear in Revelation 2 to 3. When you read the churches, the letters to the churches in Revelation 2 to 3, many of them are threatened with the second coming, with the rapture. Some are told that they're going to be left behind, and others are told that, don't worry, they will be taken out before the tribulation, or at least before the great tribulation, the second part of the tribulation. And when you read about these churches, you read of some who are persecuted and some who are wealthy and in a worldly sense are doing very well. So we cannot expect all churches to be persecuted at the coming of the rapture. However, we should all be ready for persecution, because persecution is promised for Christians if we live properly. And I believe that these churches who are worldly, which the Bible says that they're naked and blind and they're just wicked churches, if they were living properly, they would probably be persecuted as well. Let's keep on reading Luke 21, 20 to 28. When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. For this is the time of punishment and fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. There will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people. They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Remember here that verse 12 has said, but before all this, these things will happen. And here we have an event that is being described to us. It sounds like it's the tribulation that has arrived. Here it is very important for us to read verse 24, because it says, they will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So during this time that he is describing between 20 and 24 here, after Jerusalem is attacked, the Jews will have to flee into all the nations. It's a time of punishment for them. And this time of punishment will end when the time of the Gentiles ends. When the Gentiles will take over Jerusalem and they will trample on it. And once the time of the Gentile ends, the Jews will come back to it. This is exactly what happened in 70 AD. This is not the final tribulation period, because in the final tribulation period, this will happen again. Jerusalem will be surrounded again, and the Antichrist and his armies will attack them again, but they will not need to flee into all nations at that time. Jesus himself will come down, and he will fight against the Antichrist and the nations of the world, and he will win, and then 1,000 years of peace will come on Jerusalem. So the Jews will stay in Jerusalem, and they will reign over the world from Jerusalem. This is describing exactly what happened in 70 AD, where they were scattered around the earth. The church age started, the time of the Gentiles, where God focuses on the church, and once God is finished with the church, he will turn his attention back on his people, and they will come back into their land in Jerusalem. And this is what has happened in 1948. This section here of 20 to 24, there's kind of a double prophecy here. This is specifically talking for the people of that time and what they were going to face in 70 AD when the Romans would come and conquer them. And this is where Jesus begins in Matthew, that not one stone will be left upon another. That's exactly what happened to the temple. So this was a prophecy for that time. However, it is also a prophecy for the coming times, because in Matthew, it speaks about the abomination that causes desolation. And a time of destruction like has never occurred in the past and will never occur again. This is not 70 AD. That is a prophecy for the time of the tribulation, halfway through the time of the tribulation. This is where it's important to understand about prophecy. Prophecy often speaks about several time periods, and it speaks about different time periods. So some phrases and sentences are speaking to the full completion of the prophecy, and some are talking about a partial fulfillment of the prophecy. Let's keep on reading here. Verse 25 to 28. There will be signs in the sun, the moon, the stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world, for the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. When these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Let us jump back here and understand that right before we broke off in verse 12, it said, but before all these things, so before all the signs that are described to us from 8 to 11, there's going to be, first of all, there's going to be persecution of the church. They're going to be betrayed. Jerusalem is going to be surrounded. And there's going to be a time of distress and of wrath against the people of God. The people of God, the Jews, are going to be scattered around the earth. And then the people of God, after the time of the Gentiles is done, they will return to their land. They will return to Jerusalem. And then it speaks about the signs in the sun and the moon. Now look at what happens in verse 11, right before it says, before all these things. So right in verse 11 it says, then there will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. So we have a break in verse 12 all the way to verse 24. It tells us of what is going to happen before the beginning signs, the signs of the birth pains that are described in verse 8 to 11. And verse 25 picks up again from verse 11. This is the end of the birth pains, where fearful events happen in the heavens. So we're back here at the time right before the tribulation, where fearful events are happening. We're at the end of the birth pains, and something dreadful happens before the rapture, basically. Here we have the rapture coming. Fearful events are happening in the stars and the moon and in the sun, and people are amazed at what is happening on earth, and they will faint with terror. This is not just the Jews in Jerusalem. This is not talking about the abomination. This is talking about all nations around the world. There will be the heavenly bodies will be shaken, and at that time they will see the coming in the clouds of the Son of Man. Whenever it talks about the Son of Man coming in the clouds, we're talking about the rapture. It is not talking about the second coming here, where he comes down and fights the battle of Armageddon on earth before his reign on earth. Here we have the event of the rapture. We are told that once we see these signs in the sky and in the sun and the moon, and these events where everyone is going to be living in terror around the world, we as Christians, when we see these things begin, we are to take place, stand up, and lift up our heads, because our redemption has drawn near. The rapture is coming. It's right there around the corner. All these verses put Matthew 24 into perspective for us. It's jumping around in time periods, and that is what's very confusing. If you read Matthew, it seems like the rapture takes place after the abomination of desolation, which is not the case at all if you read Luke 21. Now let's just look at Matthew 24 again. And here, Matthew 24, we can understand that it is talking about two periods. It's talking about the destruction in 70 AD, and it's prophesying about that. And its complete fulfillment of this prophecy is going to be during the tribulation, during the abomination of desolation. Matthew 24, 15 to 21. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand, and then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetops go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the fields go back to get their cloak. However, how dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or in the Sabbath, for then there will be a distress unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. What happened in 70 AD does not fulfill what is written in verse 21. Something else is going to happen again. And as we see in Luke, this this passage can very clearly be said to be for 70 AD, because it says that the Jews will be spread across the world after that as a punishment for them until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. But this verse, and specifically verse 21, that there will be no equal time or distress ever again, is only going to be fulfilled in Revelation 13, when the Antichrist sets an image up, and there's going to be the abomination of desolation that happens in the temple in Jerusalem. I just wanted to point this out to those of you who are studying Matthew 24, to really pay attention to Luke 21, because the events in Matthew 24 are not necessarily unfolding in that order. It's a little bit here and there, but Luke 21 is way more precise on how things will happen.